Before we begin, I want you to think about someone who constantly drains your energy, someone who always seems to create drama, manipulate situations, play mind games, or leave you questioning yourself after every interaction. It could be a friend, a family member, a coworker, a partner, or someone you encounter every day. Now, here's the question that might change the way you see that person forever. What if the reason they keep affecting you isn't because they're stronger than you? What if it's because they know a few psychological rules that you don't? Most people spend years trying to fight toxic people. They argue with them, they explain themselves, they defend themselves, they try to prove their worth, they try to get the toxic person to understand, and almost every time they lose. Not because they're weak, but because they're playing the wrong game. The truth is that toxic people survive on access. They survive on your reactions, your emotions, your need for approval, your guilt, and your attention. The moment those things become unavailable, their power begins to disappear. What you're about to hear today are not ordinary self-help tips. These are 8 life-changing rules that can completely transform the way people treat you. Once you understand them, you'll begin noticing things most people never see. You'll recognize manipulation before it happens. You'll understand why some people keep targeting you. And most importantly, you'll learn how to become emotionally untouchable without becoming cold, angry, or bitter. But I need you to stay with me until the end, because the final rule is the one that changes everything. It's the rule that separates people who spend their lives trapped in toxic cycles from those who have finally break free. Because once you truly understand these 8 rules, toxic people won't fear your anger. They'll fear the fact that they can no longer control you. The first rule is simple, but it may be one of the hardest lessons you will ever learn. Stop explaining yourself to everyone. Most people spend years believing that if they can just explain themselves clearly enough, people will finally understand them. They think that if they provide enough details, enough context, enough reasons, enough evidence, then the criticism will stop, the judgment will disappear, and the conflict will finally end. But that is not how toxic people operate. A healthy person listens to understand. A toxic person listens to find ammunition. That distinction changes everything. When you explain yourself to someone who genuinely cares, communication creates connection. When you explain yourself to someone who wants control, communication becomes a weapon. Every extra sentence becomes another opportunity for them to question you, challenge you, twist your words, or make you doubt yourself. Think about how often this happens. You make a decision for your own well-being, and suddenly you feel pressured to justify it. You say no to something you don't want to do, and instead of simply saying no, you begin presenting a courtroom defense. You explain why you're busy. You explain why you're tired. You explain why you need space. You explain why you made a certain choice. And before long, the conversation is no longer about your decision. The conversation becomes a debate about whether your decision was acceptable. That is, the trap. The moment you begin defending every choice, you unconsciously hand over authority over your life to someone else. Psychologically, this happens because most human beings want acceptance. We want to be understood. We want people to see our intentions. We fairness. We want validation. These desires are normal. They are part of being human, but toxic people know this. They understand that if they can make you feel misunderstood, you will keep talking. If they can make you feel guilty, you will keep explaining. If they can make you feel uncertain, you will keep defending. And while you're busy defending yourself, they remain in control of the conversation. The strongest people understand something that most people never realize. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Read that again. Not everyone deserves an explanation. That doesn't mean becoming rude. It doesn't mean becoming arrogant. It doesn't mean refusing accountability when accountability is necessary. It simply means recognizing that your life is not a public debate. Your choices do not require unanimous approval. Your boundaries do not need a committee vote. Your peace should not depend on whether everyone understands you. There is a powerful shift that happens when you stop trying to convince everyone. You begin conserving energy. You stop carrying conversations long after they should have ended. You stop trying to correct every misunderstanding. You stop chasing people who have already decided to see you incorrectly. And perhaps most importantly, you stop abandoning yourself in an attempt to satisfy others. Many people spend their lives trapped inside what philosophers call the prison of external validation. Their happiness depends on approval. Their confidence depends on agreement. Their decisions depend on acceptance. As a result, they become emotionally dependent on the opinions of people who may not even care about them. That is a dangerous way to live, because if your identity is built on other people's approval, toxic people will always have leverage over you. They can withdraw approval whenever they want. They can criticize whenever they want. They can manipulate whenever they want. And every time they do, your emotional stability gets shaken. But something remarkable happens when you stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. You become harder to manipulate. Why? Because manipulation requires access. Manipulation requires emotional openings. Manipulation requires participation. And when you stop over-explaining, you close many of those openings. Imagine two people. The first person reacts to every criticism. They defend every choice. They explain every decision. They spend hours trying to prove themselves. The second person listens calmly, evaluates whether the criticism is useful, and if it isn't, they move on. Which person appears stronger? Which person appears more confident? Which person appears more difficult to control? The answer is obvious. Confidence is often revealed not by what you say, but by what you no longer feel compelled to explain. One of the greatest signs of emotional maturity is understanding that being misunderstood is sometimes the price of living authentically. That idea makes many people uncomfortable. We want everyone to understand us. We want everyone to see our hearts. We want everyone to know our intentions. But life doesn't work that way. Some people will misunderstand you no matter how clearly you explain. Some people will judge you no matter how many facts you provide. Some people will criticize you no matter how reasonable your decisions are. And the sooner you accept this reality, the freer you become. Because freedom begins when you stop fighting battles that cannot be won. You cannot control another person's perception. You cannot force understanding. You cannot force respect. You cannot force fairness. What you can control is your response. You can control whether you participate in endless arguments. You can control whether you keep handing your energy to people who have no intention of understanding you. You can control whether you spend your life defending your existence or living it. The people who command the most respect are rarely the people who explain the most. They are the people who know who they are. They are grounded in their values. They are clear about their boundaries. They understand their decisions. And because they understand themselves, they don't need constant agreement from everyone around them. That level of self-trust is powerful. It changes the way you walk into a room. It changes the way you handle criticism. It changes the way you walk into a room. It changes the way you deal with toxic people, because toxic people expect confusion. They expect insecurity. They expect endless explanations. What they don't expect is quiet certainty. What they don't expect is someone who can calmly say, "This is my decision," and leave it there. No debate, no defense, no performance, just certainty. And certainty is incredibly difficult to manipulate. Next time you feel the urge to explain yourself to someone who has repeatedly shown they don't want understanding, pause for a moment and ask yourself a simple question. Am I explaining because clarity is needed, or am I explaining because I desperately want approval? That question alone can change your life. Because the moment you stop seeking permission to be yourself, you become someone toxic people can no longer control. And remember this, the strongest version of you is not the one who can justify every creed. The strongest version of you is the one who knows they don't have to. The second rule is one that toxic people hope you never discover, because the moment you do, much of their power disappears. Master your emotional reactions. Most people believe power comes from having the perfect response. They think power comes from saying the right words, winning arguments, or proving someone wrong. But if you study human behavior closely, you'll notice something different. Real power is not found in controlling the conversation. Real power is found in controlling yourself. Toxic people understand something about human nature that many people never fully realize. They know that emotions can override logic. They know that when people become angry, hurt, offended, or defensive, their judgment becomes weaker. They know that emotional reactions create openings. That is why toxic people often provoke before they manipulate. Think about it. How many times has someone said something they knew would upset you? How many times has someone pushed a sensitive button, brought up your past, questioned your character, or challenged your worth in a way that felt intentional? Most people assume those moments happen by accident. Often they do not. Toxic people frequently create emotional storms because emotional people are easier to cite control than calm people. When someone can control your emotions, they can often control your decisions. They can control your focus. They can control your energy. They can control your peace. And eventually, they can influence your behavior. This is why mastering your emotional reactions is one of the greatest forms of self-defense you will ever develop. Notice I didn't say suppress your emotions. That is an important distinction. Many people hear messages about emotional control and assume they should stop feeling. They believe strength means becoming cold, detached, or indifferent. That is not strength, that is avoidance. True emotional mastery is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to feel emotions without becoming controlled by them. There is a profound difference between experiencing anger and becoming anger. There is a profound difference between feeling hurt and allowing hurt to dictate your actions. The strongest people still feel everything. They simply refuse to surrender their judgment to temporary emotions. When toxic people, they are often hoping for immediate reactions. They want the angry text message. They want the emotional outburst. They want the defensive explanation. They want the impulsive decision. Because once you react emotionally, the focus shifts away from their behavior and toward your reaction. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about what they did. It becomes about how you responded, and this is where many people lose. Not because they were wrong, but because they allowed their emotions to pull them into a battle designed by someone else. One of the most valuable psychological skills you can develop is learning to create space between stimulus and response. Someone says something disrespectful. Pause. Someone criticizes you unfairly. Pause. Someone attempts to provoke you. Pause. That pause may only last a few seconds, but those few seconds can completely change the outcome. Because in that moment, you reclaim choice. Instead of reacting automatically, you respond intentionally. And intentional responses are incredibly difficult to manipulate. The philosopher Viktor Frankl once suggested that between what happens to us and how we respond lies a space, and within that space lies our freedom. That idea is powerful because it shifts responsibility back to us. We cannot always control what people say. We cannot control what toxic people attempt. We cannot control every insult, every criticism, or every act of disrespect. But we can control whether we hand them access to our emotional state. That control changes everything. Consider two individuals facing the exact same insult. One immediately explodes. Their entire day is ruined. They replay the situation repeatedly. Their mind becomes consumed by what happened. The other person hears the same insult, evaluates it, and decides it is not worthy of their peace. The insult was identical. The difference was emotional ownership. One person surrendered control, the other retained it, and that distinction shapes the quality of an entire life. Toxic people often rely on emotional predictability. They study patterns. They learn what makes people angry. They learn what creates insecurity. They learn what triggers guilt. Then they use those patterns repeatedly. But something fascinating happens when your reactions become disciplined. You become unpredictable. The buttons that once worked stop working. The tactics that once controlled you stop producing results. The emotional hooks lose their grip. And toxic people often become frustrated because their usual strategies no longer work. Have you ever noticed how some people become more aggressive when you remain calm? There is a reason for that. Your calmness removes the reward they were expecting. Many toxic individuals are not seeking resolution. They are seeking reaction. When the reaction disappears, the game becomes less interesting. Your calmness exposes the weakness of their strategy. This doesn't mean remaining silent forever. It doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. It doesn't mean avoiding difficult conversations. It simply means refusing to allow emotional chaos to dictate your actions. You can be firm without being reactive. You can be confident without being aggressive. You can be direct without losing control. In fact, the most effective responses are often delivered calmly. Think about the people you respect most. The individuals with genuine authority rarely appear frantic. They rarely appear emotionally hijacked. They speak with clarity. They move with intention. They understand that composure creates influence. and influence is always stronger than emotional volatility. One of the greatest misconceptions in modern life is that every feeling demands immediate expression. It doesn't. Some emotions need reflection before expression. Some frustrations need understanding before response. Some situations need distance before action. Wisdom is knowing the difference. The goal is not to become emotionless. The goal is to become emotionally disciplined, because discipline protects your future from the mistakes of temporary emotions. A single angry reaction can damage relationships. A single impulsive decision can create years of regret. A single moment of lost control can hand victory to someone who never deserved it. The strongest people understand this. They know that every emotional reaction is an investment, and they choose carefully where they invest their energy. They refuse to spend their peace on people who haven't earned it. They refuse to sacrifice their focus for unnecessary drama. They refuse to allow toxic individuals to occupy valuable space in their minds. That is what emotional mastery looks like. Not perfection, not emotional numbness, not pretending nothing affects you, but possessing the strength to feel deeply while remaining firmly in control of your actions. And when you develop that strength, something remarkable happens. Toxic people stop seeing you as an easy target because they can no longer pull your strings. They can no longer predict your reactions. They can no longer control your emotional state. And the moment someone loses control over your emotions, they lose much of their control over you. Remember this: your emotions are valuable, powerful, and deeply human. But the person who controls your reactions controls a part of your life. Protect that power, and you become someone toxic people can never truly reach. The third rule is where many people begin to transform their lives in a way that others immediately notice, even if they never say a word about it. Learn to set boundaries without guilt. This sounds simple when you hear it. Most people agree with the idea of boundaries. Most people understand they are important. Most people can even explain what boundaries are. Yet when the moment arrives to actually enforce one, everything changes. Suddenly there is hesitation. Suddenly there is discomfort. Suddenly there is guilt. And that guilt is exactly what toxic people depend on. One of the most important things you will ever understand is that toxic people do not fear weak boundaries. They expect weak boundaries. What they fear are boundaries that remain firm even when pressure is applied. Anyone can create a boundary when everyone agrees with it. The real test comes when someone challenges it. The real test comes when someone becomes upset by it. The real test comes when someone tries to make you feel selfish for protecting yourself. That is where most people fold, not because they don't know what they need, not because they lack intelligence, but because they have been conditioned to associate self-respect with guilt. Many people grow up believing that being a good person means always being available, always saying yes, always understanding, always accommodating, always sacrificing, always putting themselves second. At first, this may appear noble, but over time it creates a dangerous pattern. You begin teaching people that your needs are negotiable while theirs are not. You begin teaching people that your time is available whenever they want it. You begin teaching people that your boundaries are suggestions rather than standards. And eventually, some people stop respecting limits that were never consistently enforced. Psychologically, boundaries are fascinating because they reveal something deeper than rules. They reveal self-worth. Every boundary sends a message. When you constantly tolerate disrespect, you send a message. When you repeatedly accept manipulation, you send a message. When you continually sacrifice your peace to avoid conflict, you send a message. The message is not spoken aloud, but people receive it anyway. It tells them how much access they have to your life. It tells them what behavior will be tolerated. It tells them where the line exists or whether a line exists at all. This is why boundaries are not primarily about controlling other people. They are about defining yourself. Many people misunderstand this. They think a boundary is an attempt to change someone else. It isn't. A boundary is a declaration of what you will and will not accept. You are not telling someone how they must behave. You are deciding how you will respond if they choose certain behaviors. That distinction changes everything because the moment you stop trying to control others and start taking responsibility for yourself, your power increases dramatically. Toxic people often react strongly to boundaries because boundaries remove their privileges. Think about that carefully. Healthy people may not always love your boundaries, but they generally respect them. Toxic people often become angry because boundaries interfere with access they previously enjoyed. The unlimited access, the emotional access, the psychological access, the ability to demand your time, your attention, your energy, and your peace whenever they choose. When that access is restricted, they often push back. And when they push back, they frequently use guilt as their favorite weapon. You have probably heard phrases like these before. You've changed. You used to care. I guess you're too good for us now. You're being selfish. You think only about yourself. Notice what is happening. The conversation is no longer about the boundary itself. The conversation becomes an attempt to make you feel guilty for creating it. Because guilt is often more effective than direct confrontation. If someone can make you feel guilty enough, you may remove the boundary yourself, and that saves them the effort of having to challenge it directly. This is why emotional maturity requires learning a difficult lesson. Someone else's disappointment does not automatically mean you did something wrong. That sentence alone can free people from years of unnecessary suffering. Many individuals spend their lives trying to avoid disappointing everyone. The problem is that this goal is impossible. No matter how kind you are, someone will eventually be disappointed. No matter how generous you are, someone will eventually want more. No matter how available you are, someone will eventually expect even greater access. Trying to satisfy everyone is a game you cannot win. The price of that game is often your own peace. Strong boundaries require accepting that not everyone will like your decisions, and that is okay. Respect is often built where approval ends. The people who command genuine respect are rarely the people who please everyone. They are the people who understand their values and act consistently with them. Even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is unpopular, even when others misunderstand, there is a philosophical truth worth remembering here. Every time you say yes to something, you are saying no to something else. When you say yes to everyone's demand, you often say no to your own well-being. When you say yes to constant drama, you say no to peace. When you say yes to manipulation, you say no to freedom. Life is a series of trade-offs. The question is whether those trade-offs are intentional. Boundaries allow you to choose consciously rather than react automatically. They allow you to protect what matters most: your energy, your focus, your emotional health, your future, and perhaps most importantly, your self-respect. Because self-respect grows every time you honor your own limits. Every time you keep a boundary, you strengthen trust in yourself. You prove to yourself that your needs matter. You prove to yourself that your values matter. You prove to yourself that your peace is worth protecting. And the more consistently you do this, the stronger you become. Not louder, not harsher, not more aggressive, simply stronger. One of the greatest misconceptions about boundaries is that they create distance between people. In reality, healthy boundaries create healthier relationships. Why? Because relationships built without boundaries often become built on resentment. You keep saying yes when you want to say no. You keep tolerating behavior that bothers you. You keep suppressing your feelings to avoid conflict, and eventually resentment begins to grow. Healthy boundaries prevent that resentment from taking root. They create clarity, they create honesty, they create mutual respect. The people who belong in your life will learn to respect those boundaries. The people who only valued unlimited access may resist them, and that resistance tells you something important. Not everyone who wants access to you deserves access to you. That realization changes everything, because the goal is not to become unavailable. The goal is to become intentional. The goal is not to shut people out. The goal is to protect what is valuable, and your peace is valuable, your time is valuable, your energy is valuable, your life is valuable. Do not allow guilt to convince you otherwise, because every strong boundary is ultimately an act of self-respect. And the moment you stop feeling guilty for protecting your peace is the moment toxic people begin losing their influence over your life. Remember this: the people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will often complain when you create them. Let them complain. Your responsibility is not to make everyone comfortable. Your responsibility is to protect the life you are building. The fourth rule is one of the most liberating lessons you will ever learn, and it is also one of the most uncomfortable. Stop chasing validation and approval. If toxic people have a favorite target, it is not necessarily the weakest person in the room. It is the person whose self-worth depends on the opinions of others. Think about that for a moment. When your confidence depends on someone else's approval, you hand them a level of power they never earned. The moment they praise you, you feel valuable. The moment they criticize you, you feel uncertain. The moment they approve of you, you feel secure. The moment they reject you, you question yourself. And without realizing it, your emotional state becomes tied to people who may not even have your best interests at heart. This is one of the oldest traps in human psychology. People want to belong. People want acceptance. People want to be liked. These desires are natural. They have existed for thousands of years because human beings are social creatures. We are wired for connection. We are wired for community. But there is a difference between appreciating approval and depending on it. One is healthy. The other is dangerous. The moment approval becomes a necessity instead of a preference, you become vulnerable to manipulation because toxic people understand something most people overlook. They know that if they control approval, they can often control behavior. This is why some people alternate between praise and criticism. One day they make you feel important. The next day they make you feel inadequate. One day they build you up. The next day they tear you down. This pattern creates emotional dependence. You begin chasing the next moment of approval. You begin working harder to gain their acceptance. You begin your behavior to avoid their criticism. And eventually, you stop living according to your values and start living according to their reactions. That is not freedom, that is emotional captivity. One of the most powerful shifts that can happen in a person's life is realizing that self-worth cannot be outsourced. No one can give it to you permanently. No amount of praise can create lasting confidence if you do not already respect yourself, and no amount of criticism can destroy genuine confidence if it is built on a solid foundation. This is why some people fall apart when criticized while others remain steady. The difference is not the criticism itself. The difference is where their identity comes from. If your identity comes from other people, every opinion feels like a threat. Every disagreement feels personal. Every rejection feels devastating. But when your identity comes from your values, your character, and your actions, opinions lose much of their power over you. That does not mean criticism never hurts. We are human. We all feel disappointment. We all feel rejection. We all experience moments when someone's words affect us. The goal is not to become immune. The goal is to become grounded. Grounded people do not require constant validation because they already know who they are. They understand their strengths. They acknowledge their weaknesses. They know their values. And because of that, they do not need strangers, critics, or toxic individuals to tell them what they are worth. This is where many people struggle. They spend years trying to earn respect from people who have already decided not to give it. They spend years trying to prove themselves to people who enjoy watching them struggle. They spend years seeking validation from sources that were never capable of providing it. Imagine spending your entire life carrying a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much water you pour in, it never stays full. That is what external validation often feels like. You receive praise, you feel better temporarily. Then the feeling fades. You receive approval, you feel confident temporarily. Then doubt returns. You achieve something impressive. You feel proud temporarily. Then you begin searching for the next achievement. The cycle never ends because the source is external, and anything external can be taken away. The opinions of others change. The attention of others changes. The approval of others changes. The trends change. The circumstances change. If your confidence depends entirely on those things, your confidence will constantly rise and fall. Toxic people know this. That is why they often confidence indirectly. They do not always criticize openly. Sometimes they use subtle comments. Sometimes they use comparison. Sometimes they use exclusion. Sometimes they use sarcasm. Sometimes they make you feel as though you are never quite enough, because someone who constantly feels inadequate is easier to influence than someone who knows their value. This is why self-respect becomes such a powerful defense mechanism. Not arrogance, not superiority, not believing you are better than everyone else. Self-respect. The quiet understanding that your worth does not increase when someone praises you and does not decrease when someone criticizes you. That understanding changes everything. You stop chasing people who do not appreciate you. You stop performing for acceptance. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. You stop abandoning your values to gain approval from people who have not earned your trust. And perhaps most importantly, you stop treating rejection as evidence that something is wrong with you, because rejection often reveals compatibility, not worth. Not everyone is meant to understand you. Not everyone is meant to agree with you. Not everyone is meant to walk the same path as you, and that is perfectly okay. One of the most mature realizations in life is understanding that being disliked is not always a dull problem to solve. Sometimes it is simply information. Sometimes it tells you that your values are different. Sometimes it tells you that your priorities are different. Sometimes it tells you that you are growing beyond environments, no longer fit who you are becoming. The strongest people learn to accept this reality. They understand that respect is more valuable than approval. Approval can be given for almost anything. Respect is earned through consistency. Approval may disappear tomorrow. Respect tends to remain. That is why wise people focus less on being liked and more on being aligned with their principles, because principles create stability. Approval creates dependency, and dependency creates vulnerability. The moment you stop chasing approval, something remarkable happens. You become harder to manipulate. You become harder to intimidate. You become harder to control, because toxic people lose one of their most effective tools. They can no longer use praise to pull you closer. They can no longer use criticism to push you around. They can no longer control your behavior by controlling your emotions. You become anchored. You become steady. You become free, and freedom is dangerous to people who rely on control. So, if there is one thing to remember, remember this. The day you stop asking others for carbon to value yourself is the day your life begins to change, because confidence built on approval is fragile, but confidence built on self-respect is something toxic people can never take away. The fifth rule may be the most important of them all, because it ties everything together. Become selective about who gets access to you. If you truly want to become untouchable to toxic people, you must understand a truth that many people spend years avoiding. Not everyone deserves a front row seat in your life. That statement sounds obvious when you hear it, but very few people actually live by it. Many people operate as if access to them should be unlimited, unlimited access to their time, unlimited access to their attention, unlimited access to their emotions, and same use unlimited access to their energy. And then they wonder why they feel exhausted, overwhelmed, and constantly surrounded by drama. The answer is often simpler than they realize. They are giving away access too freely. One of the greatest misconceptions in modern life is the belief that being a good person means being available to everyone. It does not. Being kind does not require being accessible 24 hours a day. Being compassionate does not require accepting disrespect. Being generous does not require sacrificing your peace, and being a good human being does not require allowing everyone into your inner world. Wise people understand that access is earned. Think about the most valuable places in the world. Banks protect their assets. Museums protect their treasures. Governments protect sensitive information. Successful companies protect valuable intellectual property. Anything valuable is protected. Yet, many people treat their own lives with less care than they would treat a physical possession. They protect their phones with passwords. They protect their homes with locks, but they leave their minds, emotions, and energy completely exposed to anyone who wants access. That creates problems, because toxic people rarely begin by taking everything. They begin by taking a little attention, a little emotional energy, a little peace, a little time, and because the losses seem small, people often ignore them. But over time, those small losses accumulate. Weeks become months, months become years. And eventually, people wake up wondering why they feel emotionally drained. The answer is often hidden in who they continue allowing access to. This is why emotional maturity requires becoming selective. Not judgmental, not arrogant, not isolated, selective. There is a difference. Judgment says everyone is a threat. Wisdom says not everyone belongs in the same place in your life. Some people belong in your inner circle, some belong at a distance, some belong only in specific seasons of your life, and some people simply do not belong there at all. The challenge is that many people confuse history with qualification. They believe someone deserves unlimited access simply because they have known them for a longer toy. But time alone does not create trust. Character creates trust. Respect creates trust. Consistency creates trust. A person can be present in your life for 10 years and still damage your peace. Another person can enter your life recently and treat you with more respect than anyone ever thought. Hence, length of relationship is not the same thing as quality of relationship. That realization changes how you evaluate the people around you. Instead of asking, how long have they been here? You begin asking, how do they affect my life? Do they support growth? Do they respect boundaries? Do they encourage accountability? Do they bring clarity or confusion? Do they leave you feeling stronger or smaller? These questions matter because every relationship has an influence, every conversation has an influence, every environment has an influence, and whether you realize it or not, the people closest to you help shape your thoughts, emotions, habits, and decisions. This is why toxic people can be so dangerous, not because they are powerful, but because prolonged exposure influences perception. Spend enough time around negativity and negativity begins to feel normal. Spend enough time around manipulation and manipulation begins to feel familiar. Spend enough time around disrespect and disrespect begins to feel acceptable. That is why protecting access is not selfish, it is necessary. Many people spend years trying to change toxic individuals. They try explaining, they try helping, they try fixing, they try rescuing, they try understanding. And while empathy is important, there is a point where wisdom must take over. Because some people are committed to patterns they have no intention of changing. And no amount of effort on your part can transform someone who refuses responsibility for their own behavior. This is one of the hardest truths to accept. You cannot save everyone, you cannot heal everyone, you cannot carry everyone. And trying to do so often comes at the expense of your own well-being. At some point, protecting your peace becomes more important than winning someone's approval. At some point, creating distance becomes healthier than continuing the struggle. At some point, choosing yourself becomes necessary. Many people fear this because they worry it sounds selfish. But there is a profound difference between selfishness and self-respect. Selfishness says, only I matter. Self-respect says, I matter too. And that distinction is critical. Healthy people understand balance. They care about others without abandoning themselves. They give without depleting themselves. They support others without sacrificing their own mental and emotional health. Toxic people often dislike this balance because it limits their influence. They prefer unlimited access. They prefer unlimited emotional availability. They prefer situations where your needs remain secondary to theirs. But once you become selective, the dynamic changes. You stop answering every demand. You stop participating in every conflict. You stop attending every drama-filled situation. You stop feeling responsible for solving problems that do not belong to you. And suddenly your life becomes quieter. Not because life becomes perfect, but because you stop inviting chaos into spaces where peace belongs. One of the greatest indicators of growth is realizing that peace is not something you find. It is something you protect, and protection requires choices. It requires awareness. It requires courage. Most importantly, it requires understanding that your life is valuable, your attention is valuable, your energy is valuable, your future is valuable. Not everyone deserves unrestricted access to those things. The people who truly care about you will respect this. The people who only benefited from your lack of boundaries may resist it. Let them. Their reaction often reveals more than their words ever could. As you move forward, remember what these 5 rules have been teaching all along. Stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Master your emotional reactions so nobody can control your state of mind. Set boundaries without guilt because your peace deserves protection. Stop chasing validation because your worth is not determined by opinions. And finally, become selective about who gets access to your life because this is where true freedom begins. The goal was never to defeat toxic people. The goal was never to prove yourself to them. The goal was never to change them. The goal was to become so grounded in your own value, so disciplined in your emotions, and so protective of your peace that toxic people lose the ability to influence your life. And when that happens, something extraordinary occurs. You stop surviving other people's behavior and you start building your own future. Remember this. The strongest people are not those who can handle endless toxicity. The strongest people are those who finally realize they don't have to. When you control access to your life, you control the quality of your future, and that is a power no toxic person can ever take away.